His claws pressed against my throat as thunder rolled across the mountains, and I could feel his wolf struggling for dominance beneath his skin. Rain streamed down the ancient stone walls of the throne room, turning everything silver and dangerous. "You could have started a war tonight," Theron growled, his eyes flashing gold in the firelight. His breath was hot against my face, carrying the scent of pine and barely restrained fury. "You're mine to protect, mine to command, mine. Wattpad, +1. I tilted my chin up defiantly, even as my Omega instincts screamed at me to submit. "I was never yours," I whispered back, watching something dangerous flicker behind those amber eyes. "You rejected me, remember? I'm just the inconvenient mate you never wanted." His hand tightened fractionally, and for a heartbeat I thought he might actually hurt me. Then his gaze dropped to my lips, and I felt the mate bond pulse between us, painful, desperate, undeniable. "Tell me to let you go," he commanded, voice rough with need. But I couldn't. God help me, I couldn't. Just as his lips descended toward mine, everything shifted. 3 months earlier, I always thought my first shift would be quiet. No cheering pack, no proud parents. Just me and the moon, and the hope that my bones would finally remember what they were made for. 18 years of being the wolfless girl, the Omega mistake, had taught me not to expect witnesses for my milestones. I did not expect an audience of hundreds. I did not expect a king. The night of the gathering, the 5 kingdoms glittered across the valley like spilled stars. Banners snapped in the mountain wind, each crest a promise and a threat. Warriors in dark leathers and gleaming armor crowded the stone terraces, their scents tangling pine and smoke, river and steel. I kept to the shadows near the back, clutching my cloak tight around my thin dress, hoping no one would notice that I didn't carry the easy confidence of a wolf who had already shifted. "Still wolfless, Moon Whisper?" someone muttered as they passed. I didn't turn. The words slid over me the way it always did, half insult, half pity, like they were tired of saying it and I was tired of hearing it. The moon climbed higher, white and sharp above the ring of mountains. Power thickened in the air. The alphas stood at the edge of the cliff, heads tipped back, calling their wolves to the surface in silent acknowledgement of the old magic. My skin prickled in answer. My heart stumbled. Then it hit. Not the shift, something else. A violent snap inside my chest, like a cord pulling tight from somewhere in the crowd and hooking straight into my heart. I gasped and nearly doubled over. Heat rushed through my veins, wild and golden, carrying a scent I had never known but somehow recognized: storm wind over pine, iron and ash, and something darkly sweet. Mine, something deep inside me whispered. Mine. The sound of the gathering blurred into a distant roar. I barely heard the speeches, the formal words of alliance and threat. All I could feel was that pull, that invisible tether threading through the press of bodies, tugging me forward. I tried to resist. I'd imagined my first shift, not this, not whatever was happening now. But the more I fought it, the more it hurt, a burning pressure behind my ribs, as if my bones would crack if I didn't move. So I moved. I slipped between warriors and nobles, muttering apologies I didn't remember. My feet knew where to go even when my mind didn't. Each step tightened the bond, the scent growing stronger, turning my legs weak. My wolf stirred for the first time in my life, stretching, reaching, howling silently for something just ahead. When the crowd finally broke, I saw him. Theron Blackwood, Alpha King of the 5 Kingdoms, stood on the central terrace beneath a banner of black and silver. I had seen him before from a distance on the battlefield ridge when he took our neighbor's land in the sketches passed around the pack house. None of them came close. He was taller than I remembered, shoulders broad beneath black armor chased with silver wolves. His hair, dark as midnight, was tied back at the nape of his neck. The firelight carved harsh lines into his face, every angle sharpened by power and the weight of too many dead. He turned as I stumbled to a stop. Our eyes met. The world ended. Gold flooded his irises, his wolf slamming into mine with the force of a storm. My breath vanished. The pull inside me went from ache to wildfire, roaring through my veins, setting every nerve alight. My knees nearly buckled. For a heartbeat, everything else fell away. The murmur of the crowd, the crackle of torches, the snapping banners. There was only him, and the way his gaze raked over me like a touch. Stunned, hungry, disbelieving. Mine, my wolf sang. Ours. The bond surged, a bright, blinding thread knitting between us, and I felt it, felt him, like a second heartbeat pressing against my own. I saw it hit him, too. His fingers tightened on the hilt of the sword at his hip. His chest rose on a sharp breath. For that single, impossible heartbeat, raw desire burned in his eyes, fierce and unguarded, as if the king and the warrior and the legend had all been stripped away and only the man was left, startled and undone. Then something colder swept in. I watched it happen. The hunger shuddered, replaced by horror so sharp it might as well have been a blade. His jaw locked. The gold in his eyes dimmed, swallowed by black. The hand on his sword fell away, as if my very existence burned. No, I thought, panic knifing through the haze of heat. No, please. The gathered wolves were noticing now, the sudden tension on the terrace pulling their attention like gravity. Conversations stuttered and died. Bodies shifted to follow his gaze, to see what had caught the Alpha King's attention so completely. They saw me. The thin Omega girl in a borrowed dress, standing alone in front of a king. Whispers cut through the silence like claws. Is that her? The Moon Whisper girl. Impossible. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear them. The bond thrummed between us, bright, desperate, alive. I took a step toward him before I realized I'd moved. His scent hit me full force now, dizzying. My lips parted on a breath that wasn't quite a word. Don't, he said. Just one word. Low and lethal, cracking across the terrace like thunder. It stopped me where I stood, freezing the air in my lungs. He looked at me like I was a threat, like I was the blade poised over his throat. I forced my voice to work. You feel it, I whispered. I know exactly what this is. His tone was flat, terrifying in its control. And it is a mistake. The bond recoiled as if struck. Pain flared under my breastbone. A soft, shocked sound escaped me. He stepped forward then, not toward me but past me, so close I could feel the heat of his body, smell the war and winter clinging to his skin. He stopped at the edge of the terrace, facing the crowd. Every eye was on him. The wind tugged at his dark hair, snapping the banners above like warning flags. I, Theron Blackwood, he said, voice carrying effortlessly over the gathered wolves. Alpha of the Blackwood Pack, Alpha King of the 5 Kingdoms, each title a hammer blow. Reject you as my mate. The words hit harder than any strike. For a second, I didn't understand. The syllables didn't fit together, didn't make sense, like he'd spoken a language I didn't know. Then the bond screamed. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and torn the glowing thread in two. White-hot agony exploded behind my ribs, burning through muscle, bone, breath. My knees hit stone. The world spun in a wash of torches and stars and horrified faces. A roar maybe my own. Maybe my wolf's shredded my throat, swallowed by the stunned silence. The bond didn't break. That was the worst part. It didn't snap cleanly and vanish. It tore ragged, leaving frayed edges still buried in my heart, each one hooked into him. The pain didn't end. It just changed, becoming a constant, searing throb that made it hard to breathe. I pressed my hands to the ground, fingers scraping against cold stone, trying to hold myself together, my vision blurred. His scent was everywhere, tangled with blood and smoke in the air, wrapping around me even as his words echoed. I reject you as my mate. A hand clamped around my arm, hard enough to bruise. I flinched, trying to pull away, but there was no strength left in my limbs. My wolf, newly awakened, clawed uselessly inside me, howling for him, for the bond he'd just torn. Get her out of sight, a deeper voice ordered above me. Not his. Someone else. Steady, efficient. The beta. My foggy mind supplied. The world tilted as I was hauled upright. My legs refused to work. My weight hung from his grip. The crowd blurred into streaks of color and pale faces. I caught flashes. Pity, disgust, triumph, fear. No one reached for me. No one argued. Why would they? An Omega rejected by the king was already halfway to dead. I twisted, desperate, searching for his face one more time. For a flinch, a regret, anything. Theron Blackwood stood where I'd left him, broad shoulders rigid, hands clenched at his sides. He didn't look at me. Not even once, as his beta dragged me away like a broken thing. The last thing I felt before the darkness swallowed me was the bond pulsing weakly between us, still there, still burning, refusing to die like my heart didn't understand that he'd already killed it. I woke 3 days later in a room made of stone and silence. Not my room. Not anywhere I recognized. The walls were bare granite, cold enough to leach the warmth from the air. A narrow window cut high into the wall let in a slash of gray morning light that didn't quite reach the bed. No tapestries, no rugs, nothing soft. Just stone and shadows and the distant howl of wind through the mountains. The bond throbbed dully in my chest, a constant ache that told me I was still alive even when I wished I wasn't. I tried to sit up and my body screamed in protest. Every muscle felt torn, like I'd been shredded from the inside out. My wolf stirred weakly, a faint flutter against my ribs, and even that small movement sent fresh pain radiating through the bond. I gasped and fell back against the thin pillow, pressing my hand to my sternum where it hurt worst. The door opened without a knock. An older woman entered, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, carrying a tray that smelled of broth and bread. She set it on the table beside the bed without looking at me, her movements brisk and impersonal. "You're awake," she said. "Not a question. Eat. The council wants you strong enough to stand for evaluation." "Evaluation?" My voice came out hoarse, barely more than a rasp. "The bond." She glanced at me then, her expression carefully neutral. "It didn't break. They need to determine if it will sever naturally or if other measures are required." Other measures. The words hung in the air like a threat. I forced myself upright, ignoring the way my vision swam. "Where am I?" "North Tower. The King's Council determined you should remain at the castle until the situation resolves itself." She moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, girl, you survived longer than most would have. The rejection should have killed you outright." The door closed behind her before I could ask what that meant. I looked down at the broth, steam curling into the cold air, and felt nothing. No hunger, no relief at being alive, just the constant, gnawing ache of the bond pulling toward him, toward the king who'd ripped it apart in front of hundreds and walked away. The North Tower, I learned over the next few days, was where they put things they wanted to forget. My room was at the top of a winding stair that no one climbed unless they had to. Servants delivered meals in silence and left just as quickly, their eyes sliding away from mine like I was something shameful. The other occupants of the tower, if there were any, never made a sound. At night, the wind screamed through the gaps in the stone, and I wrapped myself in the single threadbare blanket and tried not to think about how far I was from everything warm. The castle wolves whispered. I heard them when I was summoned for evaluation, when the healers poked and prodded at the bond like it was a wound that wouldn't close. They stood in clusters in the corridors, voices dropping to murmurs as I passed, eyes tracking me with a mixture of pity and contempt. That's her, the one he rejected. Pathetic, really. And Omega thinking she could be queen. I heard she tried to seduce him. Threw herself at his feet. No wonder he refused her. Imagine the weakness she'd bring to the bloodline. I kept my head down and my hands clenched at my sides, nails biting into my palms hard enough to draw blood. My wolf snarled weakly inside me, wanting to snap back, to defend us. But what defense was there? He had rejected me. In front of everyone. The whispering was just the echo of what he'd already made clear. I was nothing. Formal dinners were the worst. The council insisted I attend. To monitor the bond's stability, they said. As if watching me sit at the far end of the table while the king held court would somehow reveal whether I was dying fast enough for their liking. The great hall was all vaulted ceilings and firelight, long tables crowded with warriors and nobles from across the 5 kingdoms. Theron sat at the head on a throne of black wood and silver, commanding the room without effort. His presence pulled at every wolf in the hall, an instinctive recognition of power that made even the other alphas defer. I sat near the kitchens, tucked between minor pack members, who didn't speak to me, and tried not to look at him. I failed every time. My eyes found him like they were made for it, dragged by the bond that wouldn't let go. He never looked back. Not once in 3 weeks. He laughed at someone's joke, listened to reports from his generals, drank wine from a silver cup, and acted like I wasn't there at all, like I was a ghost haunting the edges of his hall, too insubstantial to acknowledge. But I felt him. Every night, when the castle fell silent, and I lay alone in my cold room, I felt him through the bond. His wolf, restless and furious, pacing somewhere far below in the king's chambers. I could sense his frustration, the way it clawed at him, sharp and relentless. Sometimes, late into the night, the bond would flare suddenly, a pulse of heat and hunger so intense it stole my breath. Those nights, I knew he was thinking of me, even if he'd never admit it. Those nights were the hardest, because feeling his want, his need, while knowing he'd chosen to destroy us anyway, was worse than the rejection itself. I cried into my pillow where no one could hear, pressed my face into the thin fabric, and let the sobs tear through me until my throat was raw and my chest ached from more than just the bond. My wolf whimpered, a broken sound that echoed in my skull, mourning a mate we'd had for one heartbeat before he was ripped away. The bond didn't sever. Weeks passed, and the healers had no answers. The thread between us frayed and burned and bled, but it didn't break. Every morning I woke up still tethered to him, still feeling the distant thrum of his heartbeat beneath my own. And every morning I wondered if today would be the day it finally killed me. Maybe that would be kinder. "You're still here," one of the council members said during an evaluation, his tone vaguely surprised, like he'd expected me to have the decency to die quietly by now. "Yes," I whispered, because what else was there to say? He frowned down at his notes. "The bond shows no signs of severing naturally. This is unusual, unusual, as if my survival was an inconvenience, a problem that needed solving." I stared at the floor and said nothing. That night, the bond flared again. Stronger this time, a sudden surge of heat and rage that made me gasp and curl into myself on the narrow bed. I felt his wolf snarling, felt the echo of claws raking stone, felt the frustration pouring through the bond like a flood. He was fighting it too. The realization should have brought comfort. It didn't, because fighting it meant he still wanted to destroy it, still wanted me gone, even if his wolf refused to let go. I pressed my hand over my heart, where the bond burned brightest, and closed my eyes. "I hate you," I whispered into the darkness, not sure if I was talking to him or to myself or to the cursed bond that wouldn't release us. "I hate you for this." The bond pulsed once, a weak, aching throb. Somewhere far below, in chambers I'd never see, I felt him stop pacing. For a moment, we were both still, both silent, both trapped in the same unbearable cage. Then the bond settled back into its dull, constant ache, and I turned my face into the pillow and cried until there was nothing left. The night I decided I was done dying quietly, the moon was a knife over the mountains. 3 weeks had passed since the rejection, 21 days of stone walls, whispered insults, and the bond's slow poison burning through my veins. I'd learned the patterns of the castle by then, the way the guards changed at the third bell after midnight, the moments when the north tower stairs were empty, the back doors servants used when they wanted to disappear. No one watched me too closely anymore. I wasn't a threat. I was just the king's mistake, rotting away in his highest tower. Fine, let them think that. The corridors were cold beneath my bare feet as I slipped through the shadows, my cloak wrapped tight around my nightdress. The torches burned low, throwing long fingers of light across the stone. Every distant footstep made my heart jolt, but no one stopped me. No one even looked up. An omega moving quietly after dark wasn't worth a second glance. By the time I pushed open the side door that led into the trees, my lungs were tight with something that wasn't quite fear. The night hit me in a rush, sharp pine, damp earth, the clean bite of mountain air. Above, the moon hung swollen and bright, its light pouring over the forest like water. My wolf stirred at the sight of it, weak but present, awake. "Come on," I whispered to her, to myself. "Just for tonight, let's feel something that isn't pain." I followed the narrow path away from the castle, letting instinct guide me. The bond hummed faintly in my chest, a reminder of the king sleeping somewhere behind those walls, but distance dulled the ache. Out here, surrounded by trees and starlight, I could almost pretend I belonged to myself. The forest pool lay in a small clearing, a mirror of black glass cupped in stone. Moonlight spilled across its surface, turning the water to silver. I'd heard the younger warriors talk about it, how the magic here made their wolves feel stronger, how the moon's reflection on that surface could calm even the angriest beast. I stepped to the edge and stared down. My reflection looked like a stranger. Hollow eyes, cheekbones too sharp, hair tangled from too many sleepless nights. This was the girl he'd rejected. The girl the castle wolves pitied and mocked. The one the council discussed like a problem, not a person. The bond pulsed once, faintly, as if in answer. I ignored it. The air bit at my skin as I unclasped my cloak and let it fall to the grass. My nightdress followed, pooling at my feet in a whisper of pale fabric. For a heartbeat I stood naked in the moonlight, the cold kissing every inch of exposed skin, goosebumps racing over my arms and legs. Vulnerable, wild, free. Then I dove. The water was a shock, icy enough to steal my breath. I sliced through it, the world above, vanishing in a rush of bubbles and muffled sound. For the first time in weeks, the pain of the bond was muted, smothered under the simple, brutal clarity of cold. I stayed under until my lungs burned, until the part of me that wanted to surrender to the darkness whispered now. I broke the surface with a gasp, shoving wet hair from my face, and froze. He stood on the bank, there in Blackwood. Bareheaded, no armor, just a dark shirt half unlaced at the throat and black trousers tucked into boots. Moonlight carved silver lines along the hard planes of his face, caught in his hair, turned his eyes. Gold. Blazing. Feral gold. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The night held its breath. Through the bond, his presence crashed into me like a storm electric. Furious, hungry. I felt the surge of his wolf, pressing against his skin, straining toward me with a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate in my own chest. Every nerve lit up, the water around me suddenly too tight, too small. Slowly, his gaze traveled from my face down. I felt it like a touch. The way his eyes traced the line of my throat, the rise and fall of my chest, the droplets sliding down my stomach and hips. Heat flushed through me despite the cold. I should have ducked under the water again, should have hidden, begged, apologized, something. I didn't. Instead, I stood. Water streamed from my skin as I rose, my body breaking the surface inch by slow inch. Moonlight wrapped around me, turning the scars and hollows and curves into something other, something almost beautiful. His jaw flexed, his hands curled into fists at his sides. His control cracked. I saw it, felt it. The wolf inside him rumbled louder now, a sound too low for human ears but deafening through the bond. My own wolf, small and bruised as she was, answered with a trembling whine. The magic in the clearing thickened, heavy with want and fury and something darker, more dangerous. We stared at each other. You shouldn't be out here alone. His voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it, threaded with something that wasn't quite anger. I took a step toward the shore, water lapping around my thighs. You shouldn't be, either. His eyes snapped back to mine. For a second, there was no king, no council, no rejection, just him and the bond, and the way his gaze devoured me like he was starving. My heart slammed against my ribs. The air between us felt like a live wire. Turn around, he ground out. Cover yourself. No. The word came out soft but steady. My wolf straightened inside me, spine aligning with mine. You already took everything else. You don't get to take this. His nostrils flared. This? My choice. I stepped out of the pool, water cascading down my legs, pooling at my feet in silver rivulets. The cold bit into me, but I refused to shiver. I met his gaze head-on as I walked toward him, every inch of distance shrinking with agonizing slowness. My body, my shame, my power, whatever you want to call it. His throat worked. I watched him drag his eyes back up, watched him fight to keep them there. The gold in his irises burned brighter, wolf and man locked in some silent, vicious battle. I stopped an arm's length away, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him. My skin prickled in response, that invisible thread between us humming so hard it almost hurt. Take a good look at what you rejected, I whispered. Silence crashed down, thick and absolute. For a heartbeat, I thought he would snap, close the space between us, crush his mouth to mine, give in to the bond that had been tormenting us both. His hand twitched, fingers lifting as if to touch my face, my shoulder, anything. Then his jaw locked, the moment shattered. He stepped back so fast it was almost a stumble. The loss of his heat hit me like a slap. The wolf in his eyes vanished behind a wall of iron will, leaving only the cold, controlled king. Go back to your room, Alara. My name sounded like a curse on his tongue. Now. Before I forget why I'm staying away, the bond lurched in my chest, torn between relief and hurt. Coward, my wolf snarled. He turned and walked into the trees, vanishing into the shadows without another word. He was gone before I could finish breathing in. I stood there, dripping and alone, my heart pounding against the cage of my ribs. But beneath the ache, beneath the humiliation and fury, there was something else. Triumph. Because for the first time since the night of the gathering, I had seen him crack. I had felt his desire. Sharp and undeniable, humming through the bond like a secret. He wanted me. He was terrified of it. Later, back in my freezing tower room, I curled under the blanket and stared at the door. The castle had settled into its usual restless silence, but I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Somewhere past midnight, footsteps stopped outside. Not the light tread of a servant. Heavier, familiar. The bond leapt in recognition. Claws scraped softly against stone once, twice, again. Pacing, turning, pacing. My wolf lifted her head, ears pricked. Every hair on my arm stood on end. He didn't knock, didn't speak, just moved back and forth outside my door like a caged beast, his frustration bleeding through the bond in jagged waves until my own chest ached with it. I lay there, eyes burning, listening to the sound of his claws scoring the stone between us, and knew with sudden, dangerous clarity. The cage wasn't just mine anymore. Power is a strange thing. I'd grown up believing I had none. Omegas didn't make demands. We didn't start fights. We existed on the edges, grateful for scraps, apologizing for the space we took up. For most of my life, I'd played my part perfectly. The night at the forest pool shattered that. I lay awake until dawn after hearing Theron pace outside my door, listening to his claws tear at the stone like they could somehow rip through the bond instead. If he truly didn't want me, if I were nothing but a mistake, he wouldn't have come. Wouldn't have watched me like a starving man at the water's edge and fled like I'd burned him. He'd chosen to reject me. He was still choosing it every day. Fine. If he wouldn't acknowledge me, I'd make it impossible to ignore me. The shift happened the next morning, subtle as a knife slipped between ribs. A servant arrived with a stack of neatly folded clothing and a small leather pouch jingling with coins. From the council, she said, eyes fixed on the floor. An allowance as mandated for your maintenance. My maintenance. Like I was a leaking roof. I tipped the pouch into my palm. Gold coins and thick silver discs tumbled out, far more than I'd ever held at once. Enough to clothe an entire Omega dormitory. Enough to buy a different life if I weren't trapped by a bond that refused to break. Can I choose what I buy? I asked. The servant hesitated. Within reason, my lady. My lady. That was new. It tasted wrong and right at the same time. Good, I said softly. Tell whoever's counting that I intend to use every last coin. The market in the lower bailey was a riot of color and sound, all spices and shouting and clanging metal. Wolves from every allied pack bartered with human traders, their scents thick in the air. I felt eyes on me as I moved from stall to stall, recognized faces from the whispers in the halls, heard my name, hissed like a rumor. I kept my chin high, and my smile sharp. Silks in midnight blue, blood red, emerald so deep it bordered on black. Dresses cut to flatter curves instead of hide them. Necklines that dipped just low enough to make a point. Slits that bared strong legs instead of fragile ones. I ran my fingers over embroidered hems and soft furs, ignoring the uneasy looks from the seamstress. Are you sure, miss? She murmured as she pinned the blue silk against my body. These aren't exactly modest. Perfect, I said. Make them all like that. By the time I climbed back to my tower, my arms ached from the weight of fabric. The ache felt good, chosen. I waited for the next formal dinner like a wolf waits for the moon. When the summons finally came, I took my time dressing. The deep blue silk slid over my skin like cool water, clinging to every curve, the fabric heavy enough to fall just right. The neckline framed my collarbones and the faint shimmer of Theron's half-faded rejection marked like a challenge. I let my hair down for once, brushing it until it shone, then swept it over one shoulder so it spilled like pale fire down my chest. For a moment, looking at myself in the cracked mirror, I almost didn't recognize the girl staring back. She looked like a queen fate had laughed at and thrown away. She looked like she'd started laughing back. The great hall buzzed when I entered. Conversations stalled, eyes tracking me as I walked the length of the room. I felt the heat of every gaze on my skin, some admiring, some disapproving, some calculating. The blue silk whispered around my legs, the slit flashing glimpses of thigh with each step. I didn't look toward the head of the table until I had to. Theron sat in his usual place, dark and carved in stone and shadow. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the bond tightened. His head turned. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the line of his mouth, the flare of his nostrils, the sudden stillness in his shoulders. His gaze dropped, traveled slowly down the bodice molded to my breasts, along the cinched waist, over the exposed length of leg. His fingers clenched around his goblet. The bone of his knuckles went stark white. Heat skittered through the bond, so sharp I almost stumbled. Want, shock, rage. He masked it quickly, but not quickly enough. I'd already felt it. My wolf preened. I smiled small, polite, lethal, and walked to my place near the end of the table. The game truly began when the visiting alphas arrived. They were from the eastern packs. Hard-eyed men with heavy laughs and the lazy arrogance of wolves who believed they were safe under another's roof. They took the seats nearest mine, drawn shamelessly by the scent of exposed skin and defiance. "Lady Alara, is it?" one of them said, offering his hand. His eyes dipped, lingering where the silk dipped lower. "I've heard of you." I let him take my fingers, watched Theron from the corner of my eye. "Only good things, I hope," he chuckled. They used the word impossible more than once. Then they were accurate. I laughed when they joked, laid my hand on a forearm when I leaned closer to hear a story over the noise, let my hair slip forward and brush bare skin. Nothing overt, nothing anyone could truly call improper, just enough. Enough to make the king at the head table forget his wine. Every time I dared a little more, the bond snapped tighter. Theron's attention never touched me directly, but I could feel it like a physical thing, heavy and hot on the back of my neck. His scent intensified across the hall, storm and steel, and the edge of lightning. When I reached for the wine, the neckline of my dress shifting just so, the chair beside him screeched as he gripped it. 30 minutes. That's how long he lasted. His chair scraped back so hard it jolted the table. Conversations sliced off mid-sentence. Theron stood, every inch of him carved from fury and control, and left the hall without a word, the doors slamming shut on the gust of his anger. Silence rippled through the room. Then, like nothing had happened, conversations slowly resumed. I lifted my goblet and took a slow sip of wine, victory bittersweet on my tongue. The next day, I traded silk for leather. The training grounds smelled like dust and sweat and bruised grass, a scent that scratched at some old half-buried longing. Warriors circled in pairs, snarling and grunting as they sparred with fists and claws, learning how to hurt and how to survive it. No one noticed me at first, small and cloaked, standing at the edge like a child staring through a window. I found the head warrior near the weapons rack, watching his fighters with a critical eye. He was a broad, scarred wolf with salt in his dark hair, and the posture of someone who'd never lost a fight he meant to win. "I want you to train me," I said. He glanced down, eyebrows lifting. "Do you?" "I'm not asking," I lied. "You're an Omega, the king." The king rejected me. I cut in. The words tasted less like glass this time. "He doesn't get to decide what I do with the life he didn't manage to take." He studied me for a long moment. His wolf stared through his eyes, weighing something. Then he snorted. "Fine. If you break, it's on you. Grab those practice daggers. Let's see if you can stand without crying first." I didn't cry. I fell. Hard. Repeatedly. My arms shook, my lungs burned, and my knees collected new bruises with every hour. But my body remembered things my mind didn't know. It knew the way to duck under a blow, the angle to twist out of a grip, how to let momentum carry me instead of fighting it. By the third day, I was landing more hits than I missed. By the fifth, the warriors grunted something like respect when I stepped into the ring. By the seventh, their hands on my hips to correct my stance, on my wrists to adjust my grip, on my shoulders to guide a throw, sent sparks through the bond that weren't theirs. He was watching. I felt Theron before I saw him, his presence slamming into the training grounds like a storm front. Every wolf stiffened instinctively. Conversations died. The warriors pulled back, baring their throats as he appeared on the stone balcony above, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Continue," the head warrior barked. We did. Sort of. It was impossible to pretend nothing had changed. Every move I made, every time a male's hand touched my waist, every strained breath, I could feel the bond shudder. Heat rolled down from the balcony, thick and oppressive. I didn't look up. That was my only mercy to him. When one of the younger warriors stepped behind me to adjust my grip on a spear, his chest brushing my back, the bond flared so violently I nearly dropped the weapon. That night, I slept without crying. My body hurt too much, and victory tasted too sharp. The order came at dawn. A messenger pounded on my door, shattering the fragile quiet. I opened it to find a nervous-looking Gamma clutching a scroll sealed in black wax. "For you," he said, eyes darting anywhere but my face. My heart hammered as I broke the seal. By royal decree, Alara Moonwhisper is hereby banned from participating in combat training with the male warriors of the Blackwood Pack. Any violation of this order will be considered an act of defiance against the crown. My name, his title, I read it twice. Then a third time, just to feel the words sink into my bones. It was the first time Theron had acknowledged my existence on paper. I felt the bond stir, a low, dangerous hum beneath my anger. "So," I murmured to the empty room, a slow smile curving my lips. "You are watching." War, I realized, didn't always start with blood and steel. Sometimes it began with silk, a laugh across a hall, and ink on a page. The war room emptied like a wound slowly closing. Council members filed out in tight clusters, their hushed voices bleeding into the corridor. Maps still littered the central table, inked borders bristling with red marks. Tiny flags speared into territories that might soon be battlefields. Torches spat low light against stone walls, painting everything in tired gold. Theron stood at the far end of the room, back to the door, hands braced on the table. His head was bowed, dark hair falling forward as if he were studying the map, but I could feel what he was really looking at, the future they'd been dissecting piece by piece, the one where alphas fell and kingdoms burned, and every decision he made put more blood on his hands. The bond hummed between us the second I stepped inside and closed the door. He went still. "Council is dismissed," he said without turning. His voice was edged steel. "Whatever you need can go through my beta." "It can't," I answered. He lifted his head at the sound of my voice. For a moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then his shoulders drew tighter beneath his shirt, tension sharpening every line. "Alara," he said, carefully blank, "you shouldn't be here. Then you shouldn't have banned me from training. Yet, here we both are." He straightened slowly and finally turned to face me. The sight of him still did something traitorous in my chest. Dark shirt rolled at the forearms, veins standing out on his hands, jaw shadowed with the beginnings of a beard. King and wolf and man, all wrapped in one impossible body. The bond flared, heat licking under my skin, and my wolf shoved closer, hackles already up. I clung to my anger like a lifeline. "Why did you reject me?" I asked. No preamble, no polite dance. The words came out rougher than I'd intended, scraped raw by weeks of silence and restless nights. His gaze flicked past me to the door, then back. "You know why?" he said. "Omegas don't survive in my world. That's your answer?" I took a step closer. My hands trembled, so I curled them into fists. "Not even a new lie? Just the same excuse you threw at me like scraps in front of everyone?" A muscle jumped in his cheek. "It isn't an excuse. It's the truth." "You mean I'm not good enough for the great Alpha King?" His eyes darkened, the gold rim around his pupils brightening just a fraction. "I mean you are a liability I can't afford." The words were a slap. They landed exactly where he meant them to, right where I'd always been weakest. Not enough. Never enough. The bond reacted before I could. Pain flared between us, sharp and sudden, like it was protesting his words. My wolf snarled, and I didn't bother to hold her back this time. "Then why can't you stay away from me?" I demanded. "Why do I feel you watching me every moment like I'm a threat, or a temptation you can't quite resist?" His jaw clenched. "Alara. No. Answer me." I stepped around the end of the table, closing the distance until only a few feet were left between us. The air buzzed with tension, too tight, too hot. "Why did you ban the males from training with me? If I'm such a liability, such a mistake, why does every touch that isn't yours make your wolf lose its mind?" He stared down at me, towering and furious, and something else that scared him more than anger ever could. The room seemed to shrink around us, walls pressing in on the gravity of the bond. Because, he ground out, every time another male touches you, my wolf wants to rip them apart. The confession dropped between us like a stone into deep water, sending ripples through the bond. My breath caught. He didn't stop. Because when you laugh with them in the hall, it feels like claws dragging down my spine. His voice grew harsher, each word dragged from somewhere he didn't want me to see. Because I hear your heartbeat in my sleep, even when I'm on the other side of the castle. Because I can smell your tears in the stone outside your door, and it makes me want to tear this place down brick by brick. He took a step toward me, another, until I had to tilt my head back to keep his gaze, until his scent wrapped around me, dizzying storm and pine and the metallic tang of barely leashed aggression. Because this bond, he said, low and savage, is destroying me, and I hate you for it. The air punched out of my lungs. Not because of the hate. I'd expected that. I'd felt it every time he turned away. Every time he pretended not to feel the same wildfire under his skin. No, it was the rest that gutted me. The rawness under his anger. The admission that he wasn't untouched by this. That the agony wasn't mine alone. The bond surged, bright and sharp, picking up every ounce of emotion between us and amplifying it until my chest ached. Good, I whispered. His eyes narrowed. Good? Good, I repeated, my voice shaking but steady. I lifted my chin, forcing myself not to look away. I hope it destroys you, just like it's destroying me. Something flashed across his face, pain, maybe, or fury, or that same horrible, helpless want I'd seen by the forest pool. His hand twitched, fingers curling as if he didn't know whether to reach for me or push me away so hard I shattered. Alara. I couldn't let him say my name like that. Not when my wolf wanted to melt and kneel and forgive, even now. So I turned before he could see the tears burning hot at the corners of my eyes. My heels scraped against stone as I walked for the door, every step a battle between pride and the crushing weight in my chest. The bond clawed at my back, begging me to turn around, to go back, to accept any crumbs he might throw. I kept going. My hand shook when I grabbed the handle. Don't follow me, I said, without looking back. If I did, I wasn't sure which of us I'd run toward. You made your choice, remember? He didn't answer. For one suspended heartbeat, the bond hummed taut and aching, filled with things neither of us knew how to say. Then I yanked the door open and stepped into the corridor, letting the heavy wood slam shut on his silence. The tears fell before I reached the end of the hall. I wiped them away with the back of my hand, furious at myself, furious at him, furious at the moon for ever thinking this was some kind of gift. Good, I told the bond again, even as it throbbed painfully. If I had to burn for this, he was going to burn too. The day Alpha Kale Stormfang arrived, the castle shifted on its foundations. You could feel it in the way the guards straightened at the gates, in the sudden sharpness of every scent in the air. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as his entourage rode through the courtyard, wolves in storm-gray cloaks, armor etched with curling patterns that looked like lightning frozen mid-strike. I watched from an upper window, fingers curled around the stone ledge. The bond pulsed faintly in my chest, picking up Theron's tension from somewhere below. The two of them had faced each other on battlefields, teeth and steel bared. Today they would share a table and call it peace. Kyle dismounted with easy grace, tossing his reins to a stable hand without looking. He was all sharp angles and careless smiles, dark hair braided back from a face that might have been handsome if his eyes hadn't been so amused by everything he saw. Predators loved games. When his gaze swept the castle front and snagged on my window, I went very, very still. His mouth curved. A slow, knowing smile. Of course he'd scented me. A powerful alpha like him would feel the mate bond clinging to me like smoke, broken and unfinished. A weakness, an opportunity. By the time formal dinner began, my nerves were strung tight enough to snap. The hall glittered with more pomp than usual, banners newly hung, torches fed extra oil, silver polished until it caught and scattered every stray glimmer of light. Alphas from neighboring packs lined the tables, their scents thick and layered, thunderstorm and wet fur, river mud and pine, the acrid tang of old blood. Theron sat at the head as always, posture carved from ice. Kale took the seat to his right, lounging like he owned the chair, the table, the room. Their energy clashed from the first moment, not in open hostility but in something quieter, heavier, a weight pressing down on everyone else. My place waited near the end of the table again. Pathetic, decorative, expendable. Not tonight. I had chosen a dress the color of spilled wine, the silk clinging like a second skin. As I walked the length of the hall, conversation dipped and rose again in ripples, following my progress. I didn't look at Theron. I didn't need to. The bond told me enough, his heartbeat spiking, his scent sharpening, the jagged rasp of his temper. I took my seat, lifted my goblet, and pretended not to feel his gaze burning a line down my spine. Halfway through the meal, Kale rose. "Your hall is magnificent, Blackwood," he said, voice smooth enough to be a purr. "But your wolves are far too serious. A celebration without dancing is an insult to the moon." He turned, slowly, deliberately, until his eyes found mine. "Perhaps," he added, "your court simply lacks the right partner." The room chilled. Every wolf there understood exactly what he was doing. A rival alpha asking the kings, whatever I was, to dance under his own roof? It was a slap dressed as a compliment, an open hand held out to a fracture in Theron's armor. Kale extended his hand toward me, palm up. "Alara, isn't it?" His smile showed just enough teeth. "Will you do me the honor?" The bond snarled. Heat flashed through my chest, not mine, not entirely. Theron's fury poured down the invisible tether between us like liquid fire. I could almost hear his thoughts. Don't you dare." I was already on my feet, reckless, furious, tired of being spoken about like I wasn't in the room. If I was going to be used as a weapon, I wanted at least one hand on the hilt. "Yes," I said, slipping my fingers into Kale's. "I'd be delighted." Gasps fluttered along the table like startled birds. Kale's eyes glittered as he led me toward the cleared space between the hearth and the high table, where musicians scrambled to find a tune that wouldn't get them killed. His hand settled at my waist, warm and possessive. I placed my other hand on his shoulder, forcing myself not to flinch as the scent of foreign pack and cold wind wrapped around me. "You're braver than they say," he murmured as we began to move. "They say I'm a lot of things," I replied. "Most of them unflattering," he chuckled. "They say the Alpha King rejected his fated mate, that he turned away the moon's gift because she was an Omega." The bond stabbed inside me, sharp and humiliating. I kept my smile anyway. Rumors travel fast. Truth travels faster. His breath brushed my ear as he spun me. A true alpha would never reject his mate. My feet nearly tangled. I forced them steady. "Is that so?" "Mates are power. A weakness only if you don't know how to wield it." His fingers tightened fractionally on my waist. "Perhaps you need a king who knows your worth." The words slid under my skin like poison and honey both. My wolf stirred uneasily. Kale was dangerous in a different way than Theron. Less stone, more smoke, slippery, charming, built to slip between cracks and widen them. Across the room, the bond burned like a brand. Rage, feral, teeth-bared fury. I didn't have to look to know Theron's jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair hard enough to crack the wood. Good, a cruel part of me thought. Let him feel something. The song ended. Kale didn't release me right away. "Thank you," I said, stepping back just enough to break the illusion of intimacy. "For the dance." The pleasure was mine. His eyes flicked to my throat, to the faded mark there that never quite completed. "The night is young, Alara. Try not to waste it." I returned to my seat on unsteady legs, the bond throbbing with Theron's barely contained temper. Officially, dinner continued. Unofficially, every wolf in the room watched the king. He did not storm out this time. He sat very still, very quiet, like a blade deciding where to cut. The storm broke the next evening. I needed air, space, something that wasn't stone and stairs and the constant suffocating awareness of two alphas circling each other across the castle. The gardens offered all of that, twisting paths lined with moonflowers and wild roses, fountains whispering over worn stone, the night sky above wide and indifferent. I walked without direction, letting the cool air soothe the hot scrape of the bond. Running away? The voice slid out of the shadows, smooth as last night's wine. I turned. Kale lounged against a low wall, arms folded, moonlight silvering the edges of his hair. He looked perfectly at ease, like he belonged here more than I did. "Just walking," I said, "unless the paths are reserved for honored guests only." His smile curved. "I imagine very few things are reserved for you, except disapproval." I should have left. I knew that. Every instinct that wasn't currently busy being angry or hurt whispered danger, danger. But weeks of confinement and humiliation had worn my caution thin. What do you want, Kale? Only conversation. He pushed off the wall and strolled toward me, every movement unhurried. And perhaps to offer a perspective you aren't getting here. I'm not interested in a king who throws away his mate, he cut in softly. Doesn't deserve her. The words hit like a slap. My breath stuttered. He stopped close enough that I had to tilt my chin up to meet his gaze. You are strength he doesn't know how to use, Kale went on. Magic he's too afraid to touch. My wolves would spill blood for a queen like you. He lifted a hand, fingers skimming a lock of my hair where it rested over my shoulder. I jerked back, but he followed, crowding my space, his scent growing thicker, more invasive. Don't, I warned, pulse spiking. Why not? He murmured. His eyes dropped to my throat, to the incomplete mark. He rejected you, left you half-claimed, half-dead. The bond is fraying. It wouldn't take much to snap it entirely. His hand came up, fingertips brushing the side of my neck. My wolf recoiled, snarling. No. I grabbed his wrist, nails digging into his skin. You don't get to. He moved fast. In a blink, my back hit the stone column, his body pinning mine in place. His other hand clamped around my jaw, tilting my head to bare more throat. Panic surged, cold and sharp. His aura rolled over me, heavy with alpha command, pressing on my instincts, trying to force submission. Imagine it, he breathed against my skin. His face when he sensed my mark on you. When he realizes the mate he threw away chose someone stronger. I fought, kicked, twisted, shoved at his chest. It was like pushing a wall. My wolf snapped and scratched inside me, but the bond with Theron was a half-healed wound, not a shield. Kale's power shoved against it, trying to wedge itself into the cracks. Stop, my voice broke. Fear tasted like iron at the back of my throat. He lowered his mouth toward my neck. The world exploded. A roar shook the garden, so loud and raw it didn't sound human at all. The air ripped with it. Every hair on my body stood on end as the bond flared bright, white-hot, answering its source. Kale went rigid. I turned my head just enough to see over his shoulder. Theron stood at the edge of the path, chest heaving, eyes blazing pure, lethal gold. Claws extended from his fingers, teeth lengthened, wolf riding so close to the surface his skin seemed too thin to hold it. He looked like war-made flesh. Kale's smile returned, lazy and mocking, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in it too. He'd gotten what he came for. Right on time, he murmured. My heart pounded against the cage of Kale's arm, but for the first time since he'd grabbed me, I wasn't afraid of being alone. If you were Alara, what would you do in this moment? Submit to the king's protection, or stand your ground and make them both pay for underestimating you? Theron moved so fast I didn't see the first hit, only the impact. 1 second, Kale's hand was on my throat, his breath hot against my skin. The next, his body snapped sideways, torn away from me by a blur of black and teeth and claws. Stone cracked under his weight as he slammed into the garden wall, dust exploding around him. Theron stood between us, half-shifted, 7 feet of pure rage. His skin rippled, caught between man and wolf, the elongated canines, the claws curving from his fingers, the golden eyes that weren't human at all. Power rolled off him in waves so dense it pushed the air from my lungs. Mine, he snarled. The word didn't sound like language. It sounded like a promise, like a threat, like a vow carved in blood. Kale wiped at the blood on his lip and laughed, low and delighted. There he is, the great Alpha King. Took your time. Theron lunged. Claws met claws in an explosion of sound. Kyle shifted his own power forward, his wolf flashing in his eyes as he dodged and struck, but he wasn't prepared for the depth of Theron's fury. This wasn't a spar. It wasn't even a dominance display. This was an execution barely held back. They tore through the garden like a storm, breaking stone, shredding hedges, turning careful paths into rubble. I pressed against the column, heart pounding, unable to look away. Every blow Theron landed reverberated through the bond, echoing in my bones. When his claws raked across Kale's chest, I tasted copper on my tongue. Touch her again, Theron roared, voice ragged, and I'll rip out your spine. Kale spat blood and grinned. Interesting, considering you didn't want her. Theron's next strike sent him crashing to his knees. He reared back for the killing blow. Enough. Ronan, his beta, appeared as if pulled from the shadows themselves, grabbing Theron's arm with both hands. It shouldn't have been enough to stop him. Nothing should have been. But Ronan wasn't really using his strength. He was using his voice, his bond, the years between them. "King," he snapped. "Think. Not here. Not now." For a heartbeat, Theron didn't move. His claws hovered a breath from Cale's throat, muscles trembling with the urge to finish it. Rain began to fall, fat drops smacking against stone and skin. The air smelled like ozone and blood. Slowly, reluctantly, Theron lowered his hand. "This isn't over," he said to Cale, voice guttural. "It never is," Cale rasped back, still smiling even as blood soaked his shirt. "Careful, Blackwood. The more you show, the easier you are to use." Theron turned away from him. His gaze found me. All the fury that had been directed outward swung inward, focused on one target, the Omega he hadn't managed to kill with rejection, now standing here shaking under the weight of everything he refused to feel. He crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. "Come." The word was a command, clipped and lethal. "I can walk." His hand closed around my wrist like a shackle. Claws still extended, not quite breaking skin but close enough that I felt each sharp point. Then he was dragging me, out of the ruined garden, through echoing corridors, past wide-eyed servants who flinched out of the way. "Theron," I hissed, trying to keep up. "You're hurting me." His grip loosened a fraction, then tightened again when we turned a corner, and a pair of young warriors appeared. Their eyes flicked from our joined hands to my flushed face, to the blood splattered on his shirt and jaw. Whatever they saw there made them drop their gazes instantly, throats bared. We didn't stop. By the time we reached the throne room, the storm outside had fully broken. Thunder rolled over the mountains, shaking the glass in the high windows. Rain lashed the panes, turning the view of the courtyard into a smear of gray and shadow. The torches along the walls guttered in the drafts, throwing wild light across the empty hall. Theron shoved the doors shut behind us with a slam that echoed like a challenge. Only then did he let go of my wrist. I staggered back a step, rubbing the red grooves his claws had left in my skin. They stung, but not as much as the bond, which pulsed hot and erratic, matching the ragged rhythm of his breathing. "Do you have any idea what he would have done to you?" he snarled. His voice ricocheted off the stone, full of terror and fury, and something tangled between them. He looked more wolf than man, eyes almost glowing in the dim light, chest heaving. I should have cowered. Apologized. Let his anger wash over me and wait for it to ebb. Instead, something inside me snapped. Maybe I wanted him to. The lie came out smooth and sharp as a blade. Theron froze. "At least he wanted me," I went on, stepping toward him, letting the words cut us both. "At least he saw me as worth claiming." The sound that rumbled out of him wasn't human. In 2 strides, he was in front of me. So close I had to tilt my head back to keep his gaze. His hand shot up, not to strike, but to wrap around my throat. Not squeezing, not really, but firm, possessive, his thumb resting against my racing pulse. My breath caught. "You think I don't want you?" he demanded, voice low and shredded. "You think I don't lie awake every God's damned night imagining claiming you properly, the way I was meant to?" Heat flooded my face. The bond flared so bright I saw white around the edges of my vision. "You think this bond isn't ripping me apart?" His grip tightened, just enough to make my heart stutter, not enough to hurt, enough to remind me exactly how easily he could. His eyes burned into mine, all pretense stripped away. "It is. Every second. Every time you laugh with another male. Every time you walk into a room wearing those damned dresses. Every time I smell your tears through stone." His voice fractured on the next words. "My father died because they used my mother against him," he said. Softer now, but somehow more dangerous. "They took her, tortured her, made him listen to every scream. He broke. Our pack broke with him. Everyone I love becomes a weapon aimed at my throat." Rain hammered the windows like fists. "I rejected you to save you," he finished. "To save all of this." My throat tightened under his hand. For a moment, I saw past the king and the legend and the monster to the boy who'd watched his world torn apart because his father had dared to love someone. It hurt. It hurt because it made sense, because it was twisted and broken and still somehow soaked in a kind of awful love. "I don't want to be saved," I whispered. His fingers flexed against my skin. I want to be chosen. I fisted my hands in his shirt, dragging him closer until there was no space left between us, only heat and bond and the wild patter of our hearts. I want you to stop running and claim me. Not because the moon says so, because you do. Lightning flashed, whitening the room for a heartbeat. The bond surged like it had been waiting for those words, a bolt of living power striking us both. I felt it tear through us, burning away doubt, fear, every lie we'd told ourselves. His pupils blew wide, his breath hitched, his fangs elongated, sharp and gleaming. I tipped my head back, baring my throat fully. Submission, yes, but not the kind he'd tried to force on me. This was choice. This was defiance wrapped in offering. Then claim me, I whispered. Everything went very, very still. For one suspended moment, we hovered on the edge of something that would change everything. War, peace, life, death, all balanced on the sharp point of his teeth and my bared skin. The bond roared between us, waiting for his answer. I woke to warmth instead of cold. For a few hazy seconds, I didn't understand why my chest didn't ache the way it usually did, why the constant tearing pain of the bond had gone quiet. Then the world sharpened, the scent of pine and storm, the heavy weight of an arm around my waist, the steady thump of a heart against my back that wasn't mine. Theron. Memory crashed in throne room. Thunder. His mouth on my throat, the white-hot shock of his bite as the bond finally snapped into place the way it should have from the beginning. Pleasure and pain braided together until I couldn't tell them apart, until there was nothing but us and the wild, relentless pull of the moon. His mark burned now, a dull, throbbing heat at the side of my neck. Not agony, not the raw tear it had been. This was different, full, claimed, mine. My wolf sighed, sleepy and content for the first time in her life. Ours. I shifted slightly, and his arm tightened instinctively, dragging me closer. His chest was bare against my back, skin hot, scars rough beneath my shoulder blades. The blanket tangled around our legs, bare skin sliding against bare skin with every tiny movement. The room smelled like us salt and sweat, and something sweeter underneath. The scent of a completed bond. Stop thinking so loud, he muttered against my hair. His voice was rough with sleep, deeper than usual, vibrating through my spine. I smiled before I could stop myself. I didn't know there were volume controls. There are. You're breaking them. I rolled onto my back, and his arm shifted to let me move without letting me go. Morning light filtered through the high windows, painting the stone walls in soft gold. For once, the world outside felt very far away. I looked up at him. Without the armor and the anger, he looked younger. Not soft, Theron could never be soft, but less carved from stone, more human. His dark hair fell loose around his face, some strands sticking up in directions that would have made the council faint. Stubble shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, still hazy from sleep, were more gold than brown. "Good morning," I said quietly. Something that might have been a smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "That depends. On whether you're about to tell me last night was a terrible mistake," I snorted. "If you think I'm giving back what I finally got, you're more delusional than I thought." His chest shook under my hand as he laughed, low and surprised. The sound warmed something deep inside me. "Good," he said, "because I don't think I'd survive rejecting you twice." I hesitated, then lifted my hand to the mark on my neck. The skin was tender under my fingers, raised slightly, the shape of his bite a permanent crescent where everyone would see. "It feels different," I admitted. "The bond." He sobered, gaze tracking the movement of my fingers. "Because it is different. Before, it was torn and trying to heal around a wound. Now it's whole, golden and smug," I muttered, like it knew all along we'd end up here. "Smart bond," he said. I let my hand wander from my neck to his chest, tracing the nearest scar. It was a jagged line over his ribs, pale against his tan skin, like lightning frozen mid-strike. "How did you get this one?" I asked. He went still under my touch. For a heartbeat, I thought he wouldn't answer. "Night my father died," he said finally. I looked up. His eyes were on the ceiling, expression distant. "Rival pack staged an attack," he continued. "Not for territory. For leverage. They couldn't touch him on the battlefield, so they came for what he loved." His jaw tightened. "They took my mother. sent pieces of her back with their demands. My stomach clenched. Theron, he went alone, he said, voice flattening. Wouldn't let anyone follow. Said he wouldn't risk more lives. By the time I tracked his scent, it was too late. He was on his knees in the clearing, bleeding out, her body in his arms. He'd shifted half back, trying to speak. I ran to him. His hand covered the scar I'd been tracing. One of them was still there. I didn't see him. He saw me. My fingers curled against his chest. He did this. Arrow tipped with silver. Went straight through. He shrugged, like it was nothing. I survived. My father didn't. He died holding her and staring at me like he wanted to say 1,000 things, and didn't have the time for even one. Silence settled between us, heavy but not suffocating. I was 16, he said quietly. That night I swore I'd never give anyone that power over me. Never let love become a blade in someone else's hand. And then I walked into that gathering. I finished softly. His gaze dropped to mine. Whatever distance had been there vanished. And then you walked into that gathering, he echoed. And my wolf knew. He didn't care about vows or strategy or the scars on my chest. He took one look at you and tore through everything I'd built. Sorry, I said, not sorry at all. Don't be. He brushed a piece of hair from my face, his knuckles grazing my cheek. You were always going to destroy my control. I'm just angry it took me this long to stop fighting it. I swallowed past the tightness in my throat and let my hand wander further, tracing another scar near his shoulder, then one along his side. There were so many, some thin and old, others thicker, newer, each a story written on his skin. Your turn, he murmured. Tell me. There's nothing interesting to tell, I said, though my chest already ached. Elara, I sighed and stared at the patch of light on the ceiling. I grew up in a house that didn't want me, I said. My father wanted a strong heir. My mother died giving him a sickly Omega instead. The pack whispered that I was a bad omen. My father stopped correcting them after the first year. His thumb drew idle circles on my hip, silent encouragement. They put me in the smallest room, I continued. I got the leftover clothes, the leftover food, the leftover attention. When other pups shifted, they had celebrations. When I didn't, they stopped asking when mine would happen, stopped looking at me at all, really. I forced a laugh. You can't disappoint anyone if they forget you exist. He made a soft, vicious sound. I was the Omega no one wanted, I finished. Until you. Except you didn't want me either. Not really. Not then. I did, he said, and there was no hesitation in it. I did from the first breath. I just wanted not to. His fingers slid under my chin, turning my face back to his. I wasn't supposed to want this marriage, he admitted. I was supposed to take a powerful alpha female, secure alliances with bloodlines and treaties and heirs who'd be born with teeth already bared. That's what my council wanted. What my father would have wanted. And what did you want? I asked. He huffed out a breath. Didn't think I got to want anything. His mouth curved, wry and soft. Then I scented you. And my wolf laughed in my face. I smiled despite the sting in my eyes. Stubborn creature. Both of you are, he said. I spent months trying to convince myself another path was better, that I could ignore the bond, fulfill my duty, and you'd be better off far away from all of this. Then why the rejection? The question slipped out before I could stop it, softer than I'd meant it to be. It still hurt, even with his mark on my skin. His eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, there was no defense left, just regret. Because I was a coward, he said. Because I thought pushing you away would save us both. I imagined you building a life somewhere quiet, away from enemies and throne rooms and the weight of my name. I told myself your pain was worth your safety. His fingers brushed the mark on my neck, gentle as a vow. I was wrong. You were, I agreed. He winced. You're not going to make this easy, are you? No, I said. You don't get easy. You get honest. He nodded like he deserved that. Maybe he did. I'm sorry, he said then, simple and bare. For every night you cried alone. For every time I pretended not to see you. For letting my fear matter more than your pain. My throat closed. I pressed my forehead to his chest so he wouldn't see the tears in my eyes, breathing in the steady, grounding scent of him. I'm here now, he murmured into my hair. If you'll have me, all of me, the scars, the temper, the kingdom, the enemies, the way I'm going to make a mess of loving you and try again anyway. I tightened my arm around his waist. I already do, I said. You're late to your own party. He laughed again, softer this time, and pulled me up so he could kiss me slow and deep and unhurried, nothing like the frantic claiming of the night before. This was something else. Something that felt dangerously like a promise. Outside, dawn was painting the mountains gold, light spilling over peaks and into the valley. The castle would wake soon. The council would scheme, enemies would plan, war would march a little closer. But for a few stolen breaths, none of it existed. There was only the warmth of his body around mine, the steady beat of his heart under my ear, and the bond between us no longer a wound, but a golden thread tying us together in a world that would have to go through both of us now, or not at all. The summons came before dawn. A servant banged on our door with enough urgency that my heart jumped straight into my throat. Theron was already awake beside me. He slept light, like a man who'd forgotten how to rest. His arm tightened around my waist for a second, a silent reassurance, before he released me and sat up. "Enter," he called. Ronan stepped in, cloak damp from mist, eyes sharp and tired. He didn't look surprised to find us in the same bed. The bond sang too loudly now for any of them to pretend ignorance. "They've called an emergency meeting," he said. "All 5 kingdoms' representatives. They're already gathering." "Of course they are," Theron muttered. His gaze slid to me. The bond pulsed between us, steady, golden, unashamed. Last night's warmth was still on my skin, his mark a constant burn at my throat. Whatever softness we'd had in this room was about to be thrown into a pit of wolves. "You don't have to come," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered, just as quietly. "I do." The throne room had never felt so small. Banners from all 5 kingdoms hung heavy from the vaulted ceiling, colors clashing in the torchlight. Representatives filled the floor, alphas and betas, elders and generals, their scents layered and sour with tension. At the far end, the council clustered like vultures in fine clothes, every eye turned toward the dais where the throne waited. Where we waited, I stood at the base of the steps while Theron took his seat, every stare a weight pressing on my skin. Whispers rustled through the hall like dead leaves. "That's her. An Omega?" He marked her. "I can smell it. Madness. Absolute madness." Theron heard them. I felt it through the bond, that coil of anger tightening in his chest, leashed only because he needed his hands for this, not for breaking necks. His head counselor, Lord Garin, stepped forward. His gray hair was tied back, his robes immaculate, his eyes cold. "Your Majesty," Garin began, bowing just enough to be technically respectful. "We convene today regarding a matter of grave concern to the stability of the 5 kingdoms." Theron lounged back in his throne, every line of his body deceptively relaxed. "Proceed." Garin's gaze flicked to me, then away, as if I were an embarrassing stain on the stone. "The completion of your bond with an Omega," he said, and the word dripped disdain, "has made you vulnerable. Already, our enemies gather like sharks that smell blood in the water. They question your judgment, your strength." A murmur of agreement moved through the hall. "We demand," Garin continued, "that you reject her formally and take a proper mate. A strong alpha female from one of the allied packs. Someone who will secure our borders, not endanger them." My fingers curled into my palms so hard my nails bit skin. The bond flared sharply, anger, protectiveness, a promise. "An Omega queen would weaken the throne," another counselor added. "Imagine the insult. The precedent. Imagine." A Southern alpha chimed in. "What message it sends when the Alpha King crowns a liability." Theron rose. He didn't shout. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply stood, and the room fell silent under the weight of his dominance. Power rolled out from him, invisible but undeniable, pressing every wolf present toward instinctive submission. Backs straightened, heads bowed. Even the torches seemed to lean away. "Let me be absolutely clear," he said, voice calm in a way that was far more terrifying than any roar. "This will be the last time I hear those words spoken about my mate." He descended one step from the throne, then another, until he stood level with the council, looking down at them without needing the height. "Ilara is not a vulnerability," he went on. "She is not a liability. She is not a mistake to be corrected or a weakness to be traded away. His gaze swept the hall, pinning each representative in turn. "Ilara is not just my mate," he said. "She is my queen. Anyone who challenges her challenges me personally." The bond surged, fierce and bright. My throat tightened. Behind me, I heard a stifled gasp. Garen's face had gone pale, mottled with anger. "Your Majesty," he protested, "be reasonable. The other kingdoms will never accept." "Are you questioning my right to choose my own queen?" Theron asked softly. That softness sliced more cleanly than a shout. Garen's mouth snapped shut. Theron extended his hand toward me. For one heartbeat, the room disappeared. It was just his hand, palm open, waiting for me to refuse, to hesitate, to step back into the shadows where everyone thought I belonged. I stepped forward instead. My fingers slid into his, and the bond sang like a struck chord. He drew me up the remaining steps, onto the dais, until I stood beside him, facing the entire hall. "This Omega," he said, his voice carrying easily to the furthest corner, "has more strength than most alphas I've met. She survived my rejection and still stands. She walked into this castle knowing every eye would be on her, and refused to bow her head." I felt the words like a touch down my spine. "She challenged me," he continued, "when every instinct told her to submit. She transformed the cage I built for her into a weapon I now wield. She is not my weakness." He turned his head, met my eyes, and something in my chest went molten. "She is my greatest power." A servant approached with something wrapped in dark velvet. When the cloth fell away, my breath caught. The crown was simple compared to the one Theron wore, slender silver, shaped like intertwined branches, small moonstones set where leaves might have been. I had seen it once in a painting of his mother, the last queen. I'd never thought to see it outside a frame. Theron lifted it carefully, almost reverently. "Ilara Moonwhisper," he said, and though his voice was still pitched for the hall, I heard the intimacy threaded beneath, meant only for me. "Will you stand at my side, not as debt, not as duty, but as equal, as queen?" My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack bone. My old life flashed through my mind, dusty rooms, ignored birthdays, the sneer on my father's face when he called me useless. The girl I had been would never have believed this moment existed. I straightened my spine. "Yes," I said, "I will." Something like pride flared through the bond. His hands were steady as he placed the crown on my head. Then he turned back to the hall, eyes hard as steel. "All hail the Queen of the Five Kingdoms," he commanded. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ronan dropped to one knee. One by one, the others followed. Some bowed their heads reluctantly, jaws tight. Others lowered themselves more willingly, recognizing power when they saw it. Knees hit stone in waves until the throne room was a sea of bent heads and bared throats, banners hanging motionless above them. I stood there, crown heavy on my hair, and realized this wasn't just about me. It wasn't even just about us. It was about every Omega who'd ever been told they were less, every bond twisted into a weapon, every love story that had been strangled before it began. Theron reached for my hand again and squeezed once, grounding me. Later, when the hall emptied and the arguments were postponed to quieter rooms, we climbed to the battlements. Dawn was only a suggestion at first, a pale line edging the mountains. The wind was cold enough to sting, but Theron's body was a wall of warmth at my back as I leaned into him, his arms wrapping around my waist. The crown glittered faintly in the growing light. His mark burned steady at my throat. "They'll come for us," I whispered. The thought no longer felt like a nightmare, just a fact. The council, the other alphas, Kale, all of them. His lips brushed the point where my neck met my shoulder. "Let them come," he murmured against my skin. "We'll show them what true mates can do together." The sun crested the mountains then, spilling gold across the valley and turning the castle stone to fire. The kingdom stretched before us, beautiful, dangerous, ours. I laced my fingers through his where they rested over my heart. We had chosen this. Chosen each other over safety, over tradition, over the easy lie that survival mattered more than living. The world would call it reckless. Maybe it was. But as the light grew and the bond hummed steady and sure between us, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they'd have to go through both of us. If this story made your heart race even a little, tap that like button, share it with someone who loves dark romantic chaos, and tell in the comments where you're watching from, and which scene has been your favorite so far. Alara's defiance, Theron's breaking point, or this coronation on the edge of war.